The Las Vegas Raiders trade for Geno Smith. This is such a Raiders move. I thought this was a new regime. I thought things were going to be different with the Raiders now that Pete Carroll's the head coach and Tom Brady's working behind the scenes, and they were not going to tolerate mediocrity and losing football. Now it's going to be different. Well, the connection is obvious with Pete Carroll and Geno Smith. I just didn't know Pete Carroll was that high on Geno Smith. And the thing about Geno Smith is he is good enough to get you to the playoffs. But that's it. Good enough to make you competitive. That would be an improvement for the Raiders. But the Raiders' standard, this is a long time going back now, was excellence. And I thought that's what they want to be going back to and returning to the days of winning and excellence. And to be honest, that was before my lifetime. I mean, the Raiders were great in the 60s. The Raiders were great in the 70s. The Raiders were great into the early 80s. They had some success until about the early 90s. They got to the playoffs. They got to the Super Bowl with Gruden and Gannon. And ever since, it's been bad for the Raiders. It's been humiliating for the Raiders. And they've tried all these different quarterbacks. Most recently, Jimmy Garoppolo. You have now a veteran quarterback like Geno Smith. He's better than Garoppolo. But is the goal, I mean, what is the goal? It was to win now with Pete Carroll. The problem is the team that Geno Smith is going to, I don't think the weapons around him are as good as what he had in Seattle. He had Metcalf, and I'm not a huge Metcalf fan. I mean, he's a physical specimen. He is one of the great athletes at the wide receiver position we've seen when you think of his size, his strength, his speed. The thing you have to remember about him, though, is he's a little bit of a fragile player. You never want to hear that about any professional athlete. They're mentally a little fragile. If he gets frustrated, if he gets discouraged, you can take him out of the game. Well, actually, he takes himself out of the game. I've seen that so many times with DK Metcalf. You know, I had Tyler Lockett. Even with DK Metcalf's faults, he had good receivers up in Seattle. I mean, what is he going to in Las Vegas? Brock Bowers? Let me just be honest. Is Brock Bowers going to have as good of a season this year as he did in his rookie season? That would be hard to replicate. Who's his running back? Who are the receivers? Does he have a good offensive line? Is his defense any good besides Max Crosby? The answer to all those questions are no, 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 no. He has a better head coach. He has a coach that you can respect in Pete Carroll, sure. But the thing I always get back to about Geno Smith is good enough to get to the playoffs, yes, but not good enough to win in the playoffs. And I don't think he's good enough to get to the playoffs in the division he's in. Look at it. While the Chiefs may be on the decline to some degree, we'll have to see about that. The Chiefs are the clear favorite in the division as long as Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback. The Broncos are on the ascent. They got to the playoffs, and you have to think the combination of quarterback and head coach is good there. With the Chargers, I have my questions with the Chargers. But I would still say the Chargers are better than the Raiders, too. Jim Harbaugh will get his teams to the playoffs. Justin Herbert He had a great regular season. He had an awful playoff game against the Texans. But you're going into such a difficult division. And to me, again, Geno Smith just isn't that good. Slightly above average. The completion percentage is very impressive. Touchdown to reception ratio, it's good. But the eye test with Geno. He has talent. He can make throws. He can run some. But look what you've brought in, a player who's never had success in the playoffs, very little experience in the playoffs, and he's in his mid-30s. I take this from the perspective of a 49ers fan that one of the best things that ever happened to us was Russell Wilson leaving the Seahawks and then the Seahawks bringing in Geno Smith. And hear me out. I'm talking about prime Russell Wilson. His skills obviously have diminished. He's not the same player he once was, but Russell Wilson is prime tormented the 49ers. And there are 3 quarterbacks in my lifetime that have owned the 49ers. We're going in chronological order. Brett Favre, Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes. I never have feared Geno Smith, because he usually makes the mistake sometime in the game. There's some turnover, untimely interception, not necessarily early in the game, but he's gonna throw a bad ball usually at some point in the game. He started off 0-4 against the 49ers. He lost the playoff game, and the only reason he won this year and was no longer undefeated against the 49ers because the 49ers were garbage this year. That's why. So I am unimpressed by this move with the Raiders, and they'll be slightly better, slightly improved. You can respect the Raiders, but is that, again, the standard? Should that be a standard for any NFL franchise? And most likely, what's coming next? An extension. I mean, the Raiders, their problem is they need a young quarterback. They need to draft a quarterback. And they've been, I think, gun-shy ever since Jamarcus Russell. Yeah, really. Since Jamarcus Russell, they've been afraid to invest in a young quarterback, and then you've had all these guys. I mean, I think Carson Palmer was okay, and he had moments, but Garoppolo, and now Geno Smith, it feels more of the same to me, and that's not good enough. When you're in the division with the Chiefs and the Broncos and the Chargers, and the AFC right now is much tougher than the NFC. I mean, I give my respect to the Eagles this last season, but let's face it, the NFC was down this year. And the Eagles looked in some ways like an all-time great team. Very, very talented. But you look at the teams that the Eagles ran through. The 49ers were decimated by injuries. The Lions didn't even have a defense the time of the playoffs came around. The Commanders were ahead of schedule. So we think at this point, ahead of schedule. And then the Chiefs, I have to say, a weaker Chiefs team. The AFC, though, will still have those Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens. You can count on those 3 teams to be there. And then within your own division, it is so hard. The Raiders. You know, I didn't grow up rooting for the Raiders. But I respected the history and the tradition of the Raiders. They were the team on the other side of the bay, and I enjoyed watching two good football teams, the 49ers and the Raiders. I mean, it is true, just being mediocre would be an improvement for them. That would be a step in the right direction versus just being an embarrassment. But this was the best you could do, Geno Smith. I mean, I just don't understand. Yeah, I know Pete Carroll is the age he is, but what is the rush? What is the rush for the Raiders? They should have focused on getting a younger head coach and doing what they can to get the young franchise quarterback. This is not how you build a football team. Just take the teams that were in this year's Super Bowl. Take the teams that were in the conference championship games. Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Daniels. This is how you build a team. You don't go after these veteran quarterbacks. And I don't believe in Jared Goff either. Jared Goff's had some great seasons, regular seasons now in Detroit. I don't believe in Jared Goff at all in the playoffs. You know, that one of the only exceptions to this is Matthew Stafford. He is one of the few exceptions to this when you're trying to acquire a veteran quarterback, and just throw Tom Brady out. I mean, Tom Brady's just different. But Matthew Stafford, you know, teams try to take that model. That rarely works out. You build teams, and especially unless just everything goes right and you have the team all ready to go. And I don't believe the Raiders have that at all. You can't just plug in a quarterback. I mean, everything fell into place when the Rams did it with Stafford. It really did. Because Cooper Kupp, career, good player, but all-time great season. You had, you know, just a good, talented all-around team. You had one of the all-time greats, Aaron Donald, on defense. I mean, I'm still sore about that 21 season. I bring it up all the time as a 49ers fan. We had a better team. I was never more upset. I was more upset losing to the Rams in 2021 in the championship game, being up by 10 at the start of the fourth quarter than either of the Chiefs' Super Bowl losses. As crushing as those losses were, because we were clearly better than them. And with all due respect to Stafford, I was just complimenting Stafford. He's not an all-time great quarterback. It's one thing to lose to an all-time great like Mahomes. The Raiders. Oh, man. Okay, the Seahawks. A few words on the Seahawks. They must be rebuilding. I mean, and I'm surprised actually they did what they did last year, try to see if they could still be competitive with McDonald. I thought they would have blown it up a lot before last season. Now they wait to do it, and it feels like they sort of wasted a year, really. Because who are the young talents they had? I mean, they would have been much better having a worse record, trading off Geno Smith last year, and some of their other players, and then having a top 10 pick this year. Would have made more sense to me. They just put things off and were pushed back, and they're delayed building their team back up again. I mean, I felt that way ever since they had Geno Smith. Geno Smith was never the answer, because the same thing, the Seahawks, was the goal just to get to the playoffs. Okay, you did that with Geno Smith. But you knew you were never going to win big with him. So DK Metcalf looks like he's going. Geno Smith now, he's gone. And, you know, they get a third-round pick. I mean, because usually quarterbacks retrieve all good picks. You know, that tells you, okay, third-round pick. That's what the Seahawks got, and it's a high third-round pick, but if Geno Smith was that great, I think you could have gotten a second-round pick for him, right? And yeah, that would have been a high second-round pick with the Raiders, but all you got was a early third-round pick for a quarterback who's gone to a couple Pro Bowls. Not that the Pro Bowl really means much anymore, especially with all these stupid alternate rules. And, the thing about the Pro Bowl that I'd like to see is, why don't you send the guys to Hawaii after the Super Bowl? I'd love to see them run out in the field in their uniforms, or at the very least with the team helmet, like you used to see. You don't need to do any games. You don't need to do any flag football. Nothing like that. Scrap it all. It's just like the MLB All-Star Game. I want to see my players out on the best part about the All-Star Game is to see the introductions, the lineups, seeing everyone come out on the field and wearing your team hat. Same thing in many ways with the Pro Bowl. Back when I saw in the 90s, when I began watching, they changed the uniform up and the jersey, but you'd still see the helmet. And that meant something to me. Seeing that 49ers helmet, or say if you were a Packers fan, a Cowboys, Steelers, whatever. Of course, I'm bringing up, legacy franchises. Can't help it. But these two teams, I would be frustrated if I was both of these teams' fan bases. Because why were you putting off the inevitable if you're the Seahawks? And you always will know, with someone like Geno Smith, you're not going to be good enough to beat the Chiefs, even if the Chiefs aren't quite the Chiefs of the past. Okay. And this is an exciting time. It's a fun time because we're coming right up to free agency. We're seeing trades taking place, and the draft's just right around the corner. So plenty of moves to come.